We're gearing up for another college football season, and there's going to be standouts on the field that catches our eye. Our Mike Renner posted his first NFL draft big board filled with those we should be bookmarking as we watch these games. Lots of defenders in his top 50, though, but including #1 player quarterback Will Johnson out at Michigan. And we've got Mike on set, along with our other draft analyst, Ryan Wilson, to discuss this big board. So, Mike, we're not going to get to all 50, but we're going to highlight a few, which includes your #1 player. Take us through the thought process and then ultimately how you landed on Johnson.
Yeah, to me, he may not end up the best cornerback prospect I scouted, but his sophomore tape is as good a sophomore tape as I've seen from a collegiate corner. He is big, he is physical, and he is supremely confident. They had this guy on an island against the likes of Rome Odunze, against the likes of Marvin Harrison Jr., and he never backed down. He had that pick in that game against Marvin Harrison Jr. on a slant. He had the pick in, near pick in this game against Washington. He is just a really complete corner on the outside. No real weaknesses to his game. Now, he may not be the fastest guy, but he makes up for it with his ability to consistently get that first contact battle. You know, when guys are going down the football field, you can only run as fast as the guy that's holding on to you, and Will Johnson is right there in your hip pocket consistently. So when I flip on his tape, there's just not a lot to dislike, and when that's the case, that's how you end up at #1 overall on the big board.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of differences, Mike, in our top 20 at least. Get down the board to 50, things change a little bit, but I want to give you a lot of credit as a Notre Dame alum for not going with Benjamin Morris, the quarterback out of, because he's going to be special too, and he'll certainly be in the conversation. But I also had Will Johnson #1. You see that there for many of the same reasons Mike laid out. In fact, when we talked about this on summer scouting, with the first pick with our buddy Rick Spielman, Mike's comp was Patrick Peterson. My comp was Patrick Surtain II, and Rick actually, not quite as effusive as me and Mike, had Christian Gonzalez, who also is a really good football player, injured last year. So big, strong, fast. When you talk to some scouts, one of the issues were he wasn't targeted a lot last year, but that, to Mike's point, is because he is so good, you try to shy away from what he does. And I had another scout tell me that he is actually doesn't move as fluidly, the short area quickness as Christian Gonzalez, but the dog in him, if you will, is next level, and it reminded some folks of Devin Witherspoon. So there's a lot to like about what we have here, and Mike and I obviously like him a lot because he's #1 on our boards.
Yeah, certainly a lot to like about #4 on your list. We're talking about two-way star, unicorn, whatever you want to call him, Travis Hunter. So, Mike, I have to ask, that #4 spot, is that more reflective of him as a wide receiver or a corner? How did you land in there at #4?
The crazy thing is, I think it's both. Okay. Like, truly, I think he's probably more special at corner, but if he just wanted to focus on wide receiver, given how gifted he is, I think that 4 ranking is still justified. Like, he has the goods in both regards, and it's just the ball skills, fluidity, ease of movement. The fact that he doesn't even get to focus on one of those two positions, the fact that he has to play both, the fact that he's playing over 100 snaps in every single game, yet still plays both at a high level, just speaks to the caliber of athlete we're dealing with. I mean, you see him there with the ball in his hands, truly a special mover doing that, and then his ball skills. I do think the NFL will like him more at corner, but the question is going to be 18 wide receivers are getting paid more than the highest paid corner. He might see that and say, you know, it's a little more fun to catch passes than try to stop people from catching them.
Yeah, the folks I've spoken with in the league think that probably corner is his best route to long-term success. But Mike made this case on the podcast a few weeks ago that, and he just said it here, that you get paid pretty well as a wide receiver, too. The other thing to consider is that, I don't know what the data is, but anecdotally, it feels like when you're slighter of frame and you're getting hit as opposed to trying to hit guys, there's a higher incidence of injury. We know he got hurt in the Colorado State game last year when he was on offense on a cheap shot, and you can't guard against cheap shots on either side of the ball, but he did get banged up. And look, the short area quickness, the twitch, the long arms, he reminds me of a miniaturized version, if you will, of Joey Porter Jr., but he's more fluid in his movements. And there's sometimes where he gets beat down the field. He had a tough game against Stanford, but I would just point to this, Tommy and Jacqueline. He played, by my estimate, 5 million snaps last year. He might have been tired for some of those snaps. So I think when you only play him 50, 60, 70 snaps a game, he might even be more of a playmaker, whatever side of the ball he ends up on.
And we'll talk about another CU player in just a bit, but let's go one player behind Hunter at 5 on Mike Renner's big board, and that's going to be Carson Beck, the first quarterback, by the way, on your board. You've seen some tape. What do you like about Carson Beck? What are you still anticipating you want to see here in 2024?
I want to see him attack down the football field a little more. I think he was very conservative in his first year as starter. You saw a lot of good in his ability to work on timing, to be able to operate that offense, just get the ball where it needs to go, and then let his playmakers take over. But you never saw that next step where it's like, hey, if that first thing's not there, let me go create. Let me do a little bit of something. I think we need to see that to his game for him to bump up into that #1 pick conversation. But as it stands right now, this guy would have been a first rounder if it wasn't the most loaded quarterback class we've seen in recent memory last year. Like, he could have come out if there was only a couple guys at the top, and he would have been a top 10 to 15 pick based off his tape. But returns to school, now the top dog in this upcoming class, because he is just such an NFL projectable sort of body type already, in terms of the size, in terms of a good arm, in terms of the accuracy, in terms of how he can operate that offense. So a lot to like. Maybe not a guy to get super, super excited about, but that was just the first season we saw him. You know, a lot of guys in their collegiate careers, they don't peak their first season, so we're going to get to see a little more of him here. I think he can leap up into that #1 overall conversation.
Yeah, he's my quarterback 1 as well, Tommy Jacklin. And actually, I might be a little higher on Carson, at least in August, than Mike and Rick. But we talked about the athleticism. I think he has a big arm. I think he moves better than people perhaps are giving him credit for. Maybe they haven't seen enough of him to say either way. I thought he threw with anticipation when given the opportunity. And he can push the ball down the field. But to Mike's larger point, he wasn't asked to do a whole lot. And that's one of the strikes against you, fair or not, when you play at somewhere like Georgia, when everyone that you line up next to is a 5-star, and they can carry the burden, and you don't have to do it by yourself. And the larger question for me, and I'm sure me and Mike and Rick will be talking about this in the months to come, is who's going to be this year's Jaden Daniels or Joe Burrow to come out of nowhere? We know who Carson Beck is. He's a quarterback 1 for a lot of folks right now. But who's going to come out of the pack and separate themselves as we move forward to perhaps run down Carson Beck for that #1 quarterback spot when it's all said and done?
Let's transition to a pair of receivers that are within the top 15, Tyrone McMillan and Luther Burden. Kind of compare, contrast, and walk us through your mindset of putting 1 at 7 and 1 at 13.
Yeah, have Burden in the top 10 and McMillan just outside. They really couldn't be more different types of wide receivers. You have Burden basically living in the slot. He's a yak guy, screen guy, that sort of player, to where once the ball's in his hand, he can do anything. He can make you miss. He can run over you. He's super strong, very physical. Still he kind of reminds me of early career Malik Neighbors, where it was all the traits, all the explosiveness, and never really put it together as a full wide receiver in terms of his route running ability. And then all of a sudden by his junior year, you saw it, and he was one of the best players in the country. I think you could see the same thing with Luther Burden in that Missouri offense. But then McMillan is your big outside, go up and get it type of wide receiver with a massive 6'4" frame, incredible ball skills, incredible coordination. If it's catchable, he's coming down with it. So very different types of wide receivers. Tyrone McMillan, more of like an A.J. Green type, or as I said, Burden more of a Malik Neighbors type, but both of them are guys you want in your offense at the next level.
And I have these guys swapped virtually in the same spots as Mike has them as well. Tyrone McMillan is my wide receiver 1 as we sit here, and Luther Burden's a few spots behind him. Mike talked about the physical differences, and they couldn't be more striking. It's like me standing next to Pete Briscoe, probably, something like that, with a little less athleticism on the field. But look, I was talking to a scout about McMillan, and he said, look, he actually moves better than Drake London, and he might end up being a better player than Drake London, and we know how good Drake London was coming out, and what he's been able to do when they're allowed to throw the ball down the field in Atlanta, and hopefully that changes this year. But Luther Burden, again, I'm going to harken back to Mike's alma mater. He reminded me a lot of Golden Tate in terms of the physicality and the strength he brings. But early career Malik Neighbors ain't a bad comp either. So two totally different players, doing two totally different things on the field. Luther did a lot of his damage in the slot last year, while no surprise, McMillan worked outside. But they feel like the type of guys that are going to be first rounders and are going to have immediate impacts once they make their way into the NFL.
You know, Ryan, talking about wide receiver prospects and seeing the visual of you and Pete, it's really a great comparison that I would like to continue as we're talking about prospects in the NFL. Ryan Wilson, Mike Renner, we certainly appreciated going down Mike's big board. And oh my gosh.
Jumping the gun. Got excited about that battle?
I was excited about the battle. I'm sorry, TT.
No,
go for it. I'm trying to steal your thunder, my guy.
No, we want to keep it going. So what we're going to do is, I mentioned we're going to get to another CU buff, and it's going to be Shador Sanders. And the gap, though, between the quarterbacks in Beck and Sanders, farther than the one we have at wide receiver as we take a look at Renner's big board here. So Mike, take me through this, because if people go to CBSSports.com, you basically characterize Sanders as a high variance prospect. What does that mean?
That means that he is going to have the negative plays that we didn't see from Beck last year. He's going to try to extend as much as possible, and because of that, he takes a lot of sacks. He took more sacks than anyone that we have on this list at the quarterback position, and that's just something that has to change before he gets to the NFL. Obviously, offensive line woes there contributed, but he contributed himself, and we saw him really struggle to overcome those over the second half of the season. So with the offensive line improved there, if we see a more within structure Shador Sanders this season, because the talent is obvious when you flip on the tape. If we see that, he can vault himself into that conversation as well for that #1 overall pick.
I want to be clear, Coach Prime, that's Mike saying that Shador is not doing enough to help his team, not me, because I think, and Mike, you talked about it, the offensive line is a big concern, right? And last year he was running for his life, and Carson Beck, Caleb Williams, anyone behind that offensive line in Colorado last year, it probably would have looked the same. There's no one tougher than Shador Sanders in college football because of some of the hits he had to take standing in the pocket and trying to make plays like this. And when he plays on time, which again, sometimes it's few and far between, he is one of the best deep ball throwers as well. But he just needs to be more consistent and not try to do so much. And this was something that Caleb struggled with a year ago, trying to drag that offense up and down the field, even though the O-line struggled to protect him. And I think Shador, as you see here, is a better athlete than perhaps we gave him credit for. But he has to play in structure, and he has to be able to get rid of the football. You're not going to hit a home run every play, and you can't take hits every play because it's not sustainable. So basically, I'm echoing what Mike just said, but I want to make it clear that if you're mad at someone and you're from Colorado, point the finger at Mike.
Yeah, I also want to be clear to Coach Prime that I didn't mean to cut off the Shador Sanders topic. That wasn't me there. It was just a mistake, right? Ryan Wilson, Mike Renner, we certainly appreciate it. And again, just a reminder, you can find Mike's Big Board right now on CBSSports.com. You can also hear more of Ryan on the With the First Pick podcast alongside Rick Spielman. You can download, follow, listen wherever you get your pods, or watch right now by scanning that QR code on your screen.